Good morning, or after evening, wherever you are. Thubten Norberling would like to welcome you to the Lam Rim Study, Reflect, Meditate Series 3. This is the third class in a six-class series taught by Venerable Sangye Khadro. Thank you, Venerable.
So, welcome everyone to this class. It's actually been going on since April, I think. This is actually class number 19 in the series, but it's been two months on, 1 month off, 2 months on, and so on. So it's yeah. So before we start with today's class, we'll do the prayers to help our minds get into a positive state for what we are doing and generate a good motivation. So during the prayers, if you can visualize the Buddha in the space in front of you, and you can imagine all living beings surrounding you, doing the prayers along with you, taking refuge in the Buddha and making a sincere aspiration to follow the path taught by the Buddha, the path leading to liberation and finally full enlightenment for the benefit of all living beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. So then the 7-limb prayer contains 7 different practices for purifying our negative energy, negative karma, delusions, and so forth, and building up our positive energy, our positive potential to be able to progress along the path. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. And then with the mandala offering, we imagine all the beautiful, pleasing, and precious things existing in the world and the universe, transformed into a pure land, offered to the Buddha, to all the objects of refuge, and make the prayer, the wish that all living beings be able to experience the pure land. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniratayami. So let's recite the mantra of the Buddha a few times. While reciting it, you can imagine light flowing from the Buddha into yourself and into all other living beings. So we are filled with this light, and it purifies negative energy and nourishes our positive potential so that we can develop the same qualities and knowledge and realizations that the Buddha has in his mind. Tayata Om Mune Mune Mahamanaye Soha. 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 So let's take a few more moments to generate a really positive, altruistic motivation for participating in this class, listening, thinking about, reflecting on, meditating on these very precious teachings given by the Buddha about how to become a Buddha ourselves, how to become fully enlightened, fully awakened. The reason we should have for wanting to become enlightened is altruism, or bodhicitta, wishing to benefit all living beings. So really try to bring into your heart such feelings, wanting to help others to be free of suffering and the causes of suffering, wanting to help others find genuine happiness and peace and the causes for those, and wanting to help all living beings go all the way to full enlightenment, and realizing that to be able to do that, we ourselves need to become enlightened. So see if you can make that your reason, your motivation for listening to these teachings today. Okay, so we're now on the great scope level of the Lam Rim. This is the third of the three main sections of the Lam Rim, the path to enlightenment. So in this section, we are looking at how to develop bodhicitta, the aspiration to become fully enlightened, to help all living beings. And last week and the week before, we looked at one method for developing bodhicitta, which is called the 7-point cause and effect method. Because our time is limited, I'm just giving a brief explanation of these points, but ideally one needs to meditate on them again and again and really bring them deeply into one's mind and heart and integrate them with our way of life and our way of being. And so today we'll start to look at another method for developing bodhicitta, which is called equalizing and exchanging self and others. And also we'll look at a way of combining the two methods, the 7-point method and this equalizing and exchanging method. So the background or the origin of this method, it was originally taught by the Buddha, and then it went to Manjushri, and Nagarjuna, Shantideva, and so on, and eventually came to Tibet by Lama Atisha. And some of you may be familiar with a text which is called the 7-point mind training by Geshe Chekawa. This isn't the same as the 7-point cause and effect method for developing bodhicitta. Both have 7 points, but they're two different systems. So the 7-point mind training, it's on the topic of lojong, mind training or thought training, thought transformation. And it's one of the main texts on that particular topic. And there's been many translations of it and commentaries in English and probably other languages as well. So that particular text, the 7-point mind training text, contains this method of developing bodhicitta. And the instructions in that text came from Atisha. When he came to Tibet from India, he brought these teachings and then he passed them down to his disciples. And I believe for several generations, they were just transmitted orally, not publicly. They weren't written down. So they were a little bit exclusive, but it's because they're said to be more difficult. These kind of practices are said to be more difficult. So yeah, they were given just to disciples who were able to practice them. And then finally, Geshe Chekawa wrote down these instructions in this text called the 7-point mind training. And then in the book, The Easy Path that we're following, Gyurme Khyentse Losang Jampa, who's giving the commentary to this text, he says that this particular method is recommended for beings of high mental capacity because it includes the practice of tonglen, or taking and giving, where you imagine taking on the suffering of others, giving your happiness to others. So for some people, that practice may be challenging. And so you have to have a strong mind to be able to do that practice. And he says this method also involves seeing the emptiness of oneself and others. So emptiness is also a somewhat challenging topic. It's difficult to understand. So anyway, it's considered perhaps more difficult to practice this particular method, which is kind of interesting in a way, because I think for Westerners or those who are not brought up in Buddhism, the previous method, the 7-point cause and effect method, is quite challenging because it involves seeing all living beings as your mothers. Maybe for Tibetans, that's not so difficult. They're brought up in a culture where they hear this kind of phrase again and again, all mother sentient beings, all mother sentient beings. So if you start hearing that from the time you're born, then maybe that's not such a difficult idea for you. But for us, that's very challenging. So I don't know. I tend to find this particular method easier, but not that I fully understand it, but it's just less challenging than seeing all beings as your mother. So this is another method. We'll go through these 5 points. This method has 5 points. Then, and then Lama Tsong Khapa innovated a unique method that combines the two traditions, the two methods, the 7.1 and the equalizing and exchanging self and others. So that was created by Lama Tsong Khapa, but it wasn't written down. Instead, he transmitted it to his disciples, and it seems like for quite a while, it was just transmitted like that. And it wasn't until the first Panchen Lama, the Lama who wrote this book, The Easy Path, that it was written down. So it's contained in this book, The Easy Path, and also the Guru Puja. Those were both by first Panchen Lama. And he lived about 200 years after Lama Tsong Khapa. So I guess for 200 years, it was kept a little bit exclusive until it was written down. So I'd like to first talk about the equalizing and exchanging self with others method before we go into this unique combined method. So the first of the 5 points is equalizing oneself and others. So our usual attitude, our kind of instinctive, maybe we could say our default mode, is to think or feel that I, me, myself, are more important, or I am more important than others. And the sense of self or I can also extend to my loved ones, my family, my community, my country, and so on and so forth. So when the Dalai Lama talks about this, he says, I am just one, and others are numerous. In fact, they're countless if we consider all living beings. So is it right to consider this one person more important than all those other people and beings? Because normally we consider the majority more important than the minority. So I'm a minority and others are the majority. So shouldn't the needs and wishes of the majority count more than that of the minority? So to correct this attitude, the usual way is to meditate on how oneself and everybody else are basically the same. We want happiness and we don't want suffering. So a very good way of doing this is just to bring to mind different people, different beings, and contemplate this is another person, another being just like me. And in their mind and their heart, they have this wish to be happy and the wish to not suffer, just this exactly the same as me. And this is a way of bringing about a more equal feeling between oneself and others. Now, that's a kind of brief way of looking at it. Later, we'll go into another way of meditating on this point, which contains 9 different points and really goes into great depth with this idea of equalizing self and others. But for now, we'll just leave it at that. And then the second point is the disadvantages of self-centeredness. It's usually called self-cherishing, but the term self-cherishing can be somewhat problematic because when it says, oh, the self-cherishing attitude is wrong and it's kind of deprecated very much, then that can lead to thinking that, oh, that means I shouldn't care about myself. And some of the language in the text does sound like that, almost like we should beat ourselves up, not care about ourselves at all. So I think it's better if we say self-centeredness or selfishness, because I think it's pretty clear that those terms, are considered not good. Having a selfish attitude, a self-centered attitude isn't good. And in fact, oh, I have it later. Yeah, I'll talk about that later. A question came up in a teaching by His Holiness about this whole idea of self-centeredness and self-compassion. So he gave a very nice answer to it. But anyway, the attitude of self-centeredness, where we feel I am more important than everybody else, and that has different levels as well. Like a very gross form of that is, where we're really not concerned about others at all, and even use others for our own welfare or harm others for one's own welfare. So that is very clear that that kind of attitude is inappropriate and just creates more suffering. So in fact, that's what the teachings say, is that this self-centered attitude, selfish attitude, is actually the source of all suffering and problems. Like Shantideva says in his text, whatever suffering there is in the world all comes from desiring myself to be happy. In other words, being single-pointedly focused on just this one person. So how is that attitude a cause of suffering? So one way of looking at that is that whatever suffering or problems we experience in our life, according to Buddhism, are the result of karma that we created in the past, negative karma. So negative or non-virtuous karma created in past lives left imprints on our mind, which now in this life ripen in the form of painful experiences, bad experiences, unwanted experiences. So when we create non-virtuous actions, why? What is our motivation? What is driving us to create those actions? If we look at that, we'll find that self-centeredness is a big part of that. So for example, killing, probably the worst non-virtuous action that we could do. When we kill another person or another being, there's always self-centeredness there. I don't like that person. They bother me. Or hunters and people who go hunting and fishing, they want to eat the meat of those beings or take their fur to keep themselves warm. So acts of killing, if we look at what motivates those, we'll find self-centeredness. I am more important than others. I can even destroy the life of another being just for my own happiness and welfare and so on. Same with stealing. When theft takes place, it's usually because I want that object and I don't want to pay for it or get it through some legal means. I'm going to steal it. Never mind, the other person wants it as well, but I am more important than they are. So if we look at non-virtuous actions, like the 10 non-virtuous actions, there can be a mixture of different motivations and attitudes going into those, but for sure there's the element of self-centeredness, selfishness. So the point then is self-centeredness, I'm more important than others, often leads to non-virtuous actions. And when we do these non-virtuous actions, we're creating the cause to experience suffering in the future. So that's one way of seeing how self-centeredness is the cause of suffering. But we can also see it just in this lifetime. For example, if we look at problems that we have, many of our problems are in relationships with other people. Family members, friends, colleagues at work, and so on. So if we look at how that problem came about, we'll probably find a certain element of self-centeredness. My happiness is more important than their happiness, or I want my way. My ideas, my views, my way of doing things are the best. And so, we are very attached to those and try to impose those on others and so forth. So even the problems that occur in our present life, we can see are related to self-centeredness. And Rilpo Rinpoche, who wrote or gave the teachings for that little booklet that I posted on the Thubten Norberling website on how to develop bodhicitta. He said that we have this tendency to compare ourselves with other people. And I think this is something we just do automatically, not deliberately. It's just something that happens in our mind. When we meet another person or see another person, some comparison goes on. And that usually leads to three attitudes, one of three attitudes. There's envy or jealousy towards those who are better in whatever way, better looking, more intelligent, more wealthy, whatever. So there's envy towards those people. Then some people we may feel are kind of inferior to us in various ways, less attractive, less intelligent, less capable, less wealthy. So towards those, we tend to have arrogance. And then there's other people who we deem to be pretty much on the same level as ourselves, not really better, not really worse. And he says towards those, we tend to have competitiveness. Wanting to get one step ahead, wanting to get more points than that person, and feeling good when we do, feeling bad when we don't. So when I heard this, I thought, oh my God, that sounds like my mind. But I'm sure I'm not the only one. These are just our nature as human beings, as unenlightened beings. And where does this all come from? Why do we do this? It's because of big me, big I am more important than others. So these kind of attitudes and behaviors are not nice. They're ugly, and they make our mind disturbed and unpeaceful, and they can lead to lots of problems. So these are just some examples of how self-centeredness or selfishness lead to suffering and problems. But this, we need to understand, the problem here is this attitude of self-centeredness. It's just one attitude within our mind. It's a habitual attitude. We didn't choose to have it. It's something we inherited from our past lives, but it's there in our mind. We need to recognize it, and we need to see that this is an unhealthy attitude that leads to suffering and problems rather than happiness and benefit. And so that's the thing we're pinpointing, that attitude rather than me, because sometimes we identify so strongly with our attitudes like self-centeredness that when we start seeing the faults of this attitude, we tend to see faults in ourselves, like, oh, I am so bad because I think this way and I feel this way and I do these things. So that is not at all the point. It's not to beat ourselves up or put ourselves down or think we're bad. Just that particular attitude in our mind, which is the target of this. So that's the second point, is to contemplate that this self-centered attitude is actually faulty, leads to problems and sufferings rather than to anything worthwhile. Third point is to look at the opposite attitude, which is cherishing others, or altruism, where we care more for others than for oneself, and to see how this leads to happiness. So it said that all good, all happiness comes from this kind of attitude. So here again, we can think in terms of karma, whatever happiness and good experiences we have in this life, just having a human life. We're very fortunate to be a human being rather than some other kind of being. And then if we have a healthy body, when we've lived so many years, and we have food to eat, and we have shelter, and so on. So all the good things we have in our life are the result of karma that we created in the past, virtuous karma, good karma. So when we create virtue, good karma, what's involved there? What is our motivation, our attitudes? And we can usually see lack of self-centeredness and instead caring for others, cherishing others. So when, for example, the 10 virtuous actions, refraining from killing, refraining from stealing, refraining from sexual misconduct, and so on. So those involve caring about others, understanding others don't want to suffer. And so we don't want to make them suffer. We want to deliberately refrain from causing them to suffer. So compassion, concern for others, lies behind our virtuous actions in relation to others, non-harming, and instead helping as much as we can, like being generous, helping them when they have needs, and so on. So concern for others lies behind virtuous actions, positive actions done in past lives. And then the imprints of those actions left on our mind are the cause for the good experiences we have in this life. For example, having a long life and having good health are the results of refraining from killing, deliberately choosing not to kill and instead protecting the lives of others. So we must have done that in our past lives to have health and relative long life. I'm pretty long. I've lived pretty long. So some of you are still young, but yeah, I mean, if we live into our 50s and 60s and 70s, so that shows that we must have protected the lives of others in past lives. And then having resources and being successful in the things we do, this comes from refraining from stealing, deciding not to steal, respecting others' right to own what they own, and practicing generosity. And again, in this lifetime, we can look at how concern for others, compassion for others, the wish to help others, how this leads to such beautiful acts of kindness, generosity, when there's a natural disaster or a war. And so many people just, go out of their way to help. Sometimes they'll even physically go to that place and help those who are in need, or they make donations. So there's just huge numbers of acts of kindness and generosity taking place around the world every single day, every single minute. And this comes from this attitude of cherishing others, caring for others. So the world would be a pretty awful place if people didn't have that attitude. There'd be a natural disaster and all these people left homeless and injured, and nobody would care. Nobody would help them. Speaking of which, I saw a really sweet little video yesterday about this dog in Kerala in the south of India. There's been a lot of floods. And so there was this one dog that got buried in a mudslide. It was buried up to its neck. So it's only the head was above the ground. And it was, barking and crying and calling out for help. So some rescuers found it. It was a female, and dug it out. And it seems it had been there for 2 days without food and water. And then they found little puppies nearby. So she was actually a mother separated from her puppies. So her puppies had also been without food and water for 2 days. So it's just so beautiful that, that they took the time and energy to rescue this dog and her babies and took care of her. So that's the attitude of cherishing others. So it's really, really beautiful and wonderful. And then for the attainment of enlightenment, of course, we have to have that attitude. Yeah, we can't become enlightened as long as we're selfish and uncaring about others. So it's an essential quality for the attainment of enlightenment. So anyway, we can go into great depth in contemplating those 2 points. So point number 2 and point number 3 are like comparing those two attitudes, selfishness on one hand and cherishing others on the other. And hopefully we'll conclude that cherishing others is a much better attitude, and we want to have more of that and less self-centeredness. So then that leads to point number 4, which is exchanging oneself with others The meaning of that is deciding to change your priorities, you might say, and changing this habit that we have of being selfish and having more of the attitude of self-centeredness. So decreasing our self-centeredness and increasing our cherishing of others, our altruism. So making that decision, making that commitment to work on that, to bring about that change in our mind. Oh yeah, here's this question that was asked to His Holiness. So the question that was asked was, can self-compassion help to generate bodhicitta? And in his reply, he said, he was talking about this particular method. He said, just as you cherish yourself, you should cherish all other sentient beings. We don't say that you should abandon cherishing yourself because you need yourself to attain Buddhahood. That makes sense. So that's clear. We're not sort of, destroying ourselves or beating ourselves up or, denying ourselves happiness. We should cherish ourselves because we have to bring ourselves to Buddhahood. And then once we are a Buddha, an enlightened being, we benefit others. So he says, some texts say things like, hold others dear and abandon yourself. But this doesn't literally mean not to work for yourself as such. The Buddha himself did the 6-year practice of austerities for his own enlightenment as well. So even when the Buddha was meditating and living a very difficult life, not eating much, not sleeping, not taking care of himself or his body anyway. So he was doing this for his own attainment of enlightenment. So he said, what you need to get rid of is the extreme self-centered attitude. The reasonable cherishing of self is not something you need to abandon. Yeah, so I thought that was really helpful. So then point number 5 is taking and giving, or tong len. So probably most of you have heard of this practice and have even practiced it. It's a method that will help us to make this change in our focus, decreasing self-centeredness and increasing altruism, cherishing of others. So basically it involves thinking of the suffering of others, feeling strong compassion for them, and then imagining taking their suffering into oneself, using it to destroy or eliminate our self-centered attitude, and then meditating on loving kindness for others and imagining that we give our positive energy, our happiness, our good karma, our good qualities, and so on to others, and it transforms into whatever they need and wish to be happy. So I'll talk more about that later, and if time, we'll do a short meditation on it. So anyway, that's just a brief explanation of the 5 points of equalizing and exchanging self and others. So then these unique instructions, which combine the 2 methods, we'll look at that. And Gyurme Khyentse Losang Jampa, the teacher of the commentary here, he says that this combined method is very effective for beginners and enables us to develop great love for all beings. So here, the first point is generating love for mother beings, mother sentient beings. And we do that by meditating on the first few points of the 7-point cause and effect method. Equanimity, seeing all beings as our mothers, recalling their kindness, and wishing to repay their kindness. So those are, as we looked at before, last week and the week before. And he said it's really good to spend time meditating on the kindness we have received from our mother and other people in our family during this lifetime. Really go into detail with that. And that's a very powerful way of cultivating open-heartedness and the feeling of appreciation and gratitude. And then that enables us to feel love for others, starting with our mother of this lifetime, but then contemplating how every being has played that role in our life in previous lives. So we have received that kind of kindness from everyone, from every living being. So that really opens our heart, enables us to feel love for others. And then he says, then when we go on to meditate on the equalizing and exchanging self for others, then this gives rise to a very special inner realization of great love. So after doing those 4 meditations to generate love from other beings, then we move on to the method of equalizing self with others. So back again to equalizing self with others. And the book, The Easy Path, actually gives 2 reasons for why we should equalize self and others. The first is, as usual, because we are all the same in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. So it's kind of a simple idea, but very profound if we really meditate on it. And I was reading one of Jeffrey Hopkins' books about, I can't remember the title of it, but it's basically about how to develop bodhicitta and loving kindness. And he spoke about how his first teacher, who I think was Geshe Wangyal in New Jersey, he was still in university at that time. His teacher taught him this meditation, equalizing self and others, just bringing to mind different people and thinking, this person wants to be happy just like me. This person doesn't want to suffer just like me. And he said he would, I don't know if he did this every night, but anyway, he stayed up the whole night doing that meditation. And he went back to the beginning of his life and he thought about all the people in his family and then in his neighborhood and then classmates at school and teachers. He would just go one by one through all the people he had ever known, he had ever met, and did this meditation. This person wants to be happy just like me. And he did that all the way up to the present. So all his probably his classmates at school and then in university and people he had worked with and neighbors and just strangers driving by on the street and so on. I thought, wow, that would be quite amazing to spend so much time and going into such detail with individual people. But, it would really have quite a profound effect on the mind. Instead of seeing others as strangers or jerks or whatever, to really think this is just another person like me who wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer. So it really does bring about a change in our mind. So then the second reason why we should equalize self and others, and it's mentioned in Panchen Lama's text, is that if someone cherishes me, I am happy. So if I cherish others, they will be happy. So that could be quite effective as well. I feel happy. I feel good when others show me kindness and compassion and treat me nicely. So if I treat others that way, then that will bring them happiness. That will make them feel good. And then Gyurme Khyentse Losang Jampa goes on to explain the difference between this point and equanimity. And I'm happy I came across that, because I used to wonder that too, like we already had equanimity meditation, and now we have equalizing self and others. They seem quite similar. So why do we need to go through this again? So he said that equanimity in the seven, which is actually a prelude to the 7-point cause and effect method, the equanimity there, this is common to both Hinayana and Mahayana, although His Holiness doesn't use the term Hinayana, he uses the term Pali tradition instead. But anyway, the path followed by those who aspire to attain their own nirvana, as opposed to the path for those who want to attain full enlightenment and benefit all living beings. So anyway, so in both of those traditions, there's the method of equanimity, and that is to overcome the tendency to discriminate between friend, enemy, and stranger, and just even out the feelings we have for others. Whereas this one here, equalizing self and others, this is unique to Mahayana. And the point here is that we're developing a higher, uncommon type of equanimity that embraces all beings with equal love and compassion, and to stop putting our own welfare ahead of that of others. So it's more than just having an even-mindedness towards all living beings, but it's going towards equalizing oneself and others, realizing there's no good reason to consider myself more important than others. And there is this special way of meditating on equalizing self and others, which has 9 points taught by Trichang Rinpoche, but I will go through that in the next few slides, so I'll put that aside for now. And then the next point is the faults of self-cherishing. This is the term he used, or self-centeredness. So that is as before. And so we contemplate how that kind of attitude of I am more important than everybody else, that leads to suffering and problems, and is also a huge obstacle if we want to follow the path to enlightenment, the Bodhisattva's path. So it's sometimes said, for a Bodhisattva, this is the biggest obstacle, self-centeredness. So it really interferes with the Bodhisattva path. And then the next point, as before, is the benefits of cherishing others. And at this point in the book, he talks about, and I think this is also in the 7-point mind training text by Geshe Chekawa, going into all the different ways that we depend on others, all the different ways that others are kind to us, not just as our mothers. And of course, that's incredible what our mother has done for us, but realizing that everything else in our life comes from others. Like all the food that we eat comes from other people and other beings. If you eat meat or use dairy products, eggs, and so on. So there are other beings who provide those types of food for us. But just, bread and pasta and rice and so on, vegetables and fruits, those are produced by farmers who grow these foods. And then there's many other people involved in the whole process of bringing them from the farm to the factory, to the market, to the restaurant and cafe, and so on. So many people involved just in one meal, or even one cup of coffee or tea, and even water. We take water for granted, but to be able to have clean, drinking water coming out of our tap anytime we want it. I mean, again, so many people have to make that possible. Building the whole system, and then sometimes treating the water to make sure that it's clean and healthy and not contaminated. So yeah, just in every aspect of our life, from food and drinks and the place where we live, our home, house, apartment, the places where we work and study and play and so on, all the buildings that we use, these are all made by other people. The clothing that we wear, the furniture that we use, the electronic devices, and then electricity itself, and the internet, and so on. So everything, if we look at every single thing in our life, there are other people and other beings working to make these things available to us. And then knowledge, the knowledge that we have also came from others. We didn't have it when we popped out of the womb. You know, we didn't even know how to talk or eat or dress ourselves or move around. So all the knowledge that we have now and the skills that enable us to get a job and function in the world and travel and so on and so forth, all of these came from other people. We depended on others to learn all of these things. So without other people, we wouldn't have any of these things. And then in terms of Dharma, the spiritual path, we depend on others to learn the Dharma. We also depend on others to practice the Dharma, because Dharma practice involves cultivating positive qualities, love, compassion, patience, and ethics, generosity, and so on and so forth. So to be able to put these practices into practice and make them part of our lives and cultivate them, we need other people as the objects for our love and our compassion and our patience. So even the difficult people that we kind of wish weren't there, we actually need them so that we can improve our patience and perfect our patience. And then for the final goal, enlightenment, totally dependent on others. No way we could reach enlightenment without other beings. So you could really go into great depth and great detail, contemplating how others are precious and important. And so this really helps us generate a strong sense of cherishing others. Others are very, very, very precious. So contemplating those points then leads to wanting to change our priorities and replace self-centeredness with cherishing of others. And the teachings talk about how the Buddha was once an ordinary person like ourselves. He was in samsara, suffering, confused, full of delusions, full of afflictions. But at some point, he decided to do this. He decided to stop being self-centered and cherish others more and cultivate compassion and love and bodhicitta and so forth. And so then he was able to follow the path and reach enlightenment. And that happened a long time ago, many, many, many lifetimes ago. And here we are, you know, we've been in samsara just as long as the Buddha was, but we're still here. We're still in samsara. We're still cycling through this cycle of death and rebirth and suffering and a long way from enlightenment. So why? It's because we haven't made that change. We haven't decided to change our mind and stop being self-centered and cherish others more. So that's what makes the difference between ourselves and the Buddha. He decided to cherish others more than self, but we are still stuck in being self-centered. So thinking in that way can also really help us to have this strong determination to make that switch in our mind. And then the next point is taking and giving, or tong len. So here the text goes into detail explaining it. And it says there are different ways of explaining it in terms of the order, which one you do first. Some traditions say you practice giving first and then taking. Others say you practice taking first and then giving. And to me, that makes more sense. And also this text says that makes more sense because just practically, if there's somebody who's really, really suffering, really mentally suffering or physically suffering, and you try to offer them food or gifts or whatever, they're not going to be able to enjoy it because their suffering is too great. So you first need to alleviate their suffering, remove their suffering before you can then give them, and they will be able to enjoy what you're giving to them. So that's how it's explained here, that you do taking first. And basically what you do is you bring to mind, it's good to start with, I think it makes sense to start with one person at a time rather than trying to take on all the suffering of all the sentient beings in all the six realms. I mean, that's a bit, some people may feel comfortable doing that, but others might feel overwhelmed. And start with someone you already have good feelings for, someone you cherish. So you could think of a family member or a friend who has some suffering, and think about the suffering they have and really generate the wish for them to be free of that suffering, and generate this very strong attitude of courage. Until I would like to take that suffering away from them and take it onto myself. Some people have that attitude naturally and spontaneously, especially parents. I think when they see their child suffering, they probably just spontaneously wish, I would like to take that suffering and have it, experience it myself so that my child doesn't have to experience it. So that's what we're trying to generate here, that kind of attitude. I would prefer to take that onto myself so that you don't have to experience it. And then we imagine the suffering taking some kind of form like smoke, darkness, fog, and imagine it coming out of the other person and into oneself. And it says you don't have to do it with the breath right from the beginning. That can be done later, but maybe in the beginning, just imagine it coming out and coming to your heart, and imagine your self-centered attitude, this selfish attitude at the heart. He says you can imagine it like a seed or a light. Sometimes they say something like a rock. I like to think of a black hole because the suffering goes into that and it just disappears. It becomes non-existent. So when you take the suffering of the other person into your self-centered attitude, then it destroys the self-centered attitude. That just gets annihilated, non-existent. So that's the point. The point is to take on the suffering and use it to overcome, annihilate, eliminate this self-centered attitude, which we have already recognized as a hindrance, a cause of suffering and problems, something we want to overcome. And then for the giving part, you meditate on a person you love, you cherish. You could probably be the same person as before. Now that you've taken away their suffering, you want to give them happiness. So you think of your own good karma, virtue, good qualities, your body, your resources, your wealth. So all the good things you have, and you imagine those taking the form of light or just transforming into whatever is needed by that person in order to be happy. And imagine giving that to them, they receive it, they enjoy it, they look happy, and so on. So you start with people you already like, feel good about, and then with more practice, you do it with strangers, people you're not so close to, and eventually with the difficult ones, the enemies, and then finally all sentient beings. So let's just do a little practice of that for a few minutes. So make yourself comfortable. Try to keep your back straight. Let your mind settle down in case other thoughts are there that are not related to the meditation that we're doing. Put those aside. And now bring to mind someone you know and care about who has suffering right now. It doesn't need to be something huge. It could just be some feeling of unhappiness or confusion, or maybe some physical pain or discomfort or illness. And it's good if you can to imagine that person in front of you. And contemplate that they are another person, another living being, and in their mind and their heart, they have the wish to be happy, to have good experiences, and to be free of suffering, bad experiences, just like you. And then see if you can generate a feeling of compassion for them, wishing that they could be free of the suffering they have, which they don't want. And then see if you can generate a strong feeling of courage that you would like to take away this person's suffering and take it upon yourself. Imagine the self-centered attitude, which is the cause of suffering and problems and a huge obstacle for our spiritual development on the path to enlightenment. So imagine that in your heart, in some sort of form like a black seed or black rock or darkness. Then imagine the person's suffering emerging from them in the form of darkness or smoke or fog and traveling through space. And then absorbing into your heart, into this self-centered attitude, self-cherishing attitude at your heart. And when it absorbs into that, it annihilates it, makes it go away, disappear, become non-existent. And just for a moment, rest in that experience of your mind being free of that obsessive attitude of I, me, I am so important, I'm the center of the universe. That's gone. Then contemplate how nice it would be if this person could have happiness, especially pure, uncontaminated happiness, but all forms of happiness. Then feel the wish that you could share your own good things from your body, your possessions, all the good things you have in your life, as well as your good karma and good qualities, which are the cause of happiness. That you would like to share these with this other person, become the cause for their happiness. And imagine all this goodness of yourself, all your own good things, taking the form of light and traveling out from your heart to the other person, going into their heart. And becoming what they need to be happy. You can even imagine giving them things that will make them happy, like the kind of food they like to eat, or beautiful flowers. Imagine them receiving those things, being happy and looking happy. So that's a kind of simple way of doing the practice and doesn't need to take a lot of time. And the more we get familiar with doing the practice, then the more we can do it with other people beyond the people we already know and love and care about. So we can start doing it even with strangers and even with difficult people. The more we get familiar with it. And Kensalo Sanjamba also talks about how we can practice Tonglen in our daily life. There's a very nice section on that in the book. One example is that when we experience some problem, some difficulty, we can, instead of getting upset about that and maybe depressed and even bad-tempered, we can think about other people who have suffering and problems. That itself is very helpful, just to remind ourselves, I'm not the only person in the world who has problems. And the problems some people have are much greater than mine. And then contemplate the suffering of others and generate compassion for them, wishing that they could be free of their suffering. And then you make the kind of wish or prayer that by you having this suffering, this problem, this difficulty, all those other people could be free from theirs. So just even to say to yourself, by me going through this problem, this difficulty, may all the other people who have a similar kind of problem, may they be free from theirs. So it's as though you're taking on that suffering on behalf of others, accepting that suffering on behalf of others so that they could be free. It's really powerful. It really changes your mind, your attitude about your problem. It really helps to overcome the self-centeredness and self-pity and other kinds of unhelpful attitudes. And it's a way of making this experience, even though it's a painful experience, making it into something meaningful and beneficial, and even the cause of attaining enlightenment. And then forgiving, when we have some positive experience, we're enjoying some nice food or nice view, whatever pleasant experience we're having, we can think of others and how they are deprived of happiness, and then wish that we could share this with others, wished all other beings could have this nice experience as well. Could I have happiness and the causes of happiness? So Tonglen is a very beautiful and very powerful practice, something we can do even in our daily life with good experiences and bad experiences that we encounter. So then he says, getting more familiar with the practice of Tonglen will enable us to generate the exceptional attitude, which is taking on the responsibility. I want to make all beings happy, and I want to free all beings from their suffering. Then, with more familiarity with that, we think, in order to do that, in order to actually bring that about, I need to become a Buddha. Only if I am a Buddha can I actually help all beings have happiness and be free of suffering. So then that leads to Bodhichitta, the determination to become fully enlightened, a Buddha, to be able to help all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes and achieve happiness in its causes. So that's just a quick explanation of how one can develop bodhicitta through this combined method. So we've run out of time, so I'll have to leave until next week this 9-point meditation on equalizing. I thought it was probably too much to do this week. So it's really wonderful. So we'll do that next week. It's already on the slides, but we'll put it up again for next week. So for next week, if you could go to the very last slide, just, if you have time, if you could read the next section of the Easy Path, page 197 to 206, and then do some meditation on repaying the kindness of Mother sentient beings. And also, if you wish, do some more of this practice of Tonglen. Get more familiar with that. It's a really beautiful practice. And Venerable Dundrup will be leading a meditation tomorrow morning on some of these points as well. You find difficult doing it on your own. So let's stop there and make a dedication of the merit, the positive energy we've created by listening, thinking about, and meditating on. We did the meditation of Tonglen, which is very, very, very powerful. Creates a huge amount of merit, positive energy. So let's share all this energy with other people and other beings all over the universe, wishing them to have happiness, to follow the path, eventually reach enlightenment as well. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel Bodhichitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-fulfilling, wish-granting jewel, source of every benefit and happiness in this world, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three sublime ones, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Thank you. See you next week.